The air in my sister's house was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon, a familiar perfume of the holidays that usually brought me comfort. Laughter spilled from the living room, a boisterous, overlapping symphony of my aunts, uncles, and cousins catching up. For years, these gatherings had been the bedrock of our family, a loud, chaotic, but loving tradition. Yet, as I squeezed Maya's small hand, a familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. At 10 years old, my daughter was a whisper in a house of shouts, a watercolor painting in a gallery of vibrant, clashing oils. Maya was not a difficult child. She was thoughtful and observant, with a rich inner world that she rarely shared with anyone but me. She saw details others missed, the way the late afternoon sun painted stripes across the carpet, the nervous flutter of a moth against the window pane. But in the whirlwind of our family, her quiet nature was often mistaken for disinterest, her shyness for aloofness. They loved her, I was sure, but they didn't quite know how to see her. "It's loud, Mommy," Maya murmured, her voice barely audible over the din as my Aunt Carol swept me into a bone-crushing hug. "It is, sweetie, but we'll stick together," I whispered back, keeping my arm wrapped around her shoulders. "Sarah, you made it!" Carol boomed, her eyes sparkling. She pinched my cheek, then her gaze flickered down to Maya for a fraction of a second. "And little Maya? You're getting tall." It was the same thing she said every year, a placeholder greeting before she turned her attention to the next arriving relative. There was no question about school, no comment on the book she was always carrying, no real acknowledgement of the person standing right there. It was a polite nod to my extension, my accessory. We moved through the room in a slow, halting dance. I would be stopped by a cousin wanting to show me pictures of their new puppy, or an uncle eager to debate the latest football game, and with every pause, I could feel Maya shrink a little more into my side. She offered small, shy smiles when spoken to directly, but the questions were always funneled through me. "Does she like her new school, Sarah? Is she still doing that drawing thing?" As if she were a subject of a documentary I was producing. The knot in my stomach tightened with each passing minute. I tried to gently nudge Maya into the conversations, to highlight her recent achievements. "Maya just won a prize in the school's art competition," I mentioned to my cousin David. He glanced down, smiled vaguely, and said, "Oh, that's nice," before immediately asking me about my work. It was like throwing a pebble into a river. There was a tiny ripple, and then she was gone, submerged again beneath the current of conversation that she was not a part of. Then came the call we were all waiting for. "Dinner's ready. Come and get it before it gets cold," my brother-in-law, Tom, bellowed from the dining room. What followed was a familiar, chaotic stampede. Bodies moved past us in a rush of excitement. Plates clattered, silverware scraped, and the volume in the house somehow managed to crescendo even higher. In the shuffle of people heading towards the sprawling buffet that covered the dining table, my hand slipped from Maya's. One moment she was there, a small, warm presence at my side, and the next she was lost in a sea of adult legs and bustling arms. "Maya!" I called out, but my voice was swallowed by the noise. A momentary panic seized me. I craned my neck, scanning the crowded room. I saw my relatives piling their plates high with glistening turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, and bright green beans. They were laughing, jostling for position, completely absorbed in the joyful ritual of the feast. For a moment, I thought I saw her near the end of the table, but it was just my niece, who was a few years younger. I started to push my way through the crowd, a polite "excuse me" on my lips. My heart was beating a little too fast. It was silly, I told myself. She was in a house full of family. She was safe. But it wasn't about safety. It was about being seen. And then I saw her. She wasn't in the line for food. She was in the living room, which was now almost empty. She had found a small, unused armchair tucked away in a corner, far from the chaotic energy of the dining room. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her back straight. She was just watching the family she belonged to but was not a part of. And in front of her, on the small end table, there was no plate, no food. No sign that anyone had remembered she was there. She was waiting, as if for an invitation that she knew, deep down, would never come. My little girl, alone in a room full of people, completely and utterly invisible. For a long moment, I stood frozen in the doorway, the sounds of celebration in the dining room turning into a dull, mocking roar in my ears. The sight of my daughter, so small and still in that oversized armchair, fractured something deep inside me. It wasn't just sadness I felt. It was a fierce, protective anger that rose like a tide, hot and swift. The knot of anxiety I had carried all day didn't just tighten, it solidified into a stone of resolve. This ended now. I took a deep breath, smoothing the expression on my face before walking towards her. I didn't want my anger to frighten her. This wasn't her fault. I knelt before her, and her big, dark eyes lifted to meet mine. They were not filled with tears, but with a quiet resignation that was far more heartbreaking. "Hey, sweet pea," I said softly, my voice miraculously steady. "What are you doing over here all by yourself?" She gave a small shrug, her gaze dropping to her folded hands. "It was too crowded," she whispered. "Everyone was getting their food. I was just waiting." "Waiting for what, honey?" "For it to be less busy." I didn't want to get in anyone's way. The words were a punch to the gut. My 10-year-old daughter felt like an inconvenience at her own family's holiday gathering. My heart ached with a pain so sharp it almost took my breath away. I had spent years trying to gently bridge the gap between Maya and my family, hoping they would eventually see the wonderful, bright girl I knew. I had encouraged. I had nudged. I had translated her quietness for them. But my gentle approach had failed. It had allowed them to continue looking straight through her. "You are never in the way, Maya," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You belong here as much as anyone else." A decision formed in my mind, clear and absolute. I stood up. "Stay right here for one more minute. I'll be right back." I turned and walked out of the living room, my steps deliberate. I didn't walk towards the buffet to quietly get her a plate. That would have been a temporary fix, a silent acceptance of the situation. It would have saved everyone else's comfort at the expense of my daughter's spirit. And I was done doing that. I walked straight into the heart of the noise, the dining room. My brother-in-law Tom was in the middle of a loud, animated story about a fishing trip. My Aunt Carol was laughing, a forkful of sweet potato casserole halfway to her mouth. No one noticed me at first. I was just another face in the crowd. I reached for an empty water goblet and a silver spoon from the table. The metal was cool and heavy in my hand. I took another deep breath and tapped the glass. Clink. The sound was small, almost lost. Tom's voice barreled on. I tapped it again, harder this time. Clink, clink. A few heads turned. The conversations closest to me faltered. I tapped it a third time, sharp and clear. Clink, clink, clink. A wave of silence began to ripple across the room. Tom's story trailed off. My Aunt Carol lowered her fork. One by one, 20 pairs of eyes turned to me, filled with curiosity and mild confusion. In the sudden quiet, the house felt enormous. "Excuse me, everyone," I said, my voice ringing out, stronger and clearer than I ever thought possible. "Can I have your attention for just a moment?" I looked around the table, meeting the eyes of my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my sister. We're all here, enjoying this incredible meal, celebrating being together as a family. And I love these moments. But I need to say something. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. I just came from the living room, and I found my daughter, Maya, sitting all by herself in a chair. She was sitting in the dark with no plate of food, while the rest of her family is in here eating. A few people shifted uncomfortably. My sister Clara's brow furrowed in concern. My Aunt Carol had the decency to look ashamed. And I realized, I continued, my voice gaining strength, that I need to make something very clear to all of you, something I should have said a long time ago. She's not invisible. The words hung in the air, stark and undeniable. My daughter is quiet, but she is not empty. Her silence isn't a sign of being unhappy or distant. It's a sign that she's listening. It's a sign that she's thinking. She is a wonderful, brilliant, and kind little girl who won an art prize at school because she sees the world in a way most of us are too busy to notice. She carries a book with her everywhere because she has a universe inside her mind. I looked directly at my sister. She is 10 years old, and she is a full member of this family. Not a guest, not an afterthought, not an accessory to me. And I am asking you, my family, to please see her. Truly see her. Say hello to her, not just about her. Ask her a question. She has so much to share, if you would only give her the chance. The silence that followed was profound. It was no longer the comfortable silence of a family about to eat, but a heavy, echoing void filled with unspoken thoughts. The festive atmosphere had vanished, replaced by a stark, uncomfortable clarity. In that moment, I hadn't just spoken. I had held up a mirror to all of them, and the reflection was not a flattering one. In the echoing silence that followed my declaration, every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall sounded like a drumbeat marking a new, uncertain era for our family. I kept my chin high, my gaze sweeping across the faces at the table, though my heart hammered against my ribs. Had I gone too far? Had I shattered the fragile peace of the holidays beyond repair? The thought was fleeting, brushed aside by the image of Maya's lonely vigil in the other room. Whatever the consequences, it had been necessary. Then a chair scraped against the hardwood floor. It was my sister, Clara. She slowly placed her napkin on the table, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, locked on mine. There was no anger in her expression, only a deep, profound shame that mirrored my own pain. She walked around the table, not with the hurried energy of a flustered host, but with the deliberate steps of someone who understood. When she reached me, she didn't speak. She simply wrapped her arms around me, pulling me into a hug that felt like a surrender and an apology all at once. "You're right," she whispered into my ear, her voice thick. "Oh, Sarah, I am so sorry. We've been so thoughtless." When she pulled back, she turned to face the rest of the family, her hands still resting on my arms as if for support. "She is absolutely right," Clara announced, her voice trembling but firm. "This is my house, and I let this happen. We all did. Maya is not a visitor. She is our niece, our grandniece, our cousin, and we have treated her like a stranger." My brother-in-law, Tom, who had been frozen mid-story, lowered himself into his chair. His usual jovial face was pale and serious. I didn't even notice," he said, the words heavy with disbelief. "I called everyone for dinner, but I didn't check. I didn't make sure everyone was here." Aunt Carol, who had looked so affronted just moments before, now appeared crestfallen. "We just get so caught up," she said quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "It's all so loud. We forget to listen." Clara looked toward the living room. "I'll go get her." "Wait," I said, a new idea taking shape. I didn't want Maya to be the subject of a rescue mission. I wanted her to be the recipient of a genuine invitation. "Let's do this differently. Let's not make a big scene. Let's just make room." Clara understood instantly. She nodded, then walked with purpose toward the living room. I stayed where I was, a silent sentinel, watching my family begin to rearrange itself. It wasn't a physical rearrangement of chairs, but a mental one. An uncle quietly moved a serving platter to make more space. My cousin David, the one who had brushed off my comment about Maya's art, looked down at his own plate and then back toward the empty doorway, a look of dawning realization on his face. A moment later, Clara reappeared. She was holding Maya's hand. My daughter looked small and overwhelmed, her eyes wide as she took in the scene of the entire family looking at her. But she wasn't shrinking. Held firmly by her aunt's hand, she looked uncertain but not scared. Clara led her not to the empty chair in the corner, but to the seat right beside her own, across from me. It was a place of honor, nestled in the very center of the table. Then Tom stood up, a genuine warm smile finally returning to his face, but softer this time. "All right, guest of honor," he said, his booming voice tempered with a new gentleness. "That buffet is all yours. I am your personal waiter. What can I get for you? A little bit of turkey? A mountain of mashed potatoes? You name it." Maya looked at him, then at me. I gave her a small, encouraging nod. Could I have some of the green beans, please?" she asked, her voice a tiny thread of sound. "The best green beans in the world, coming right up," Tom declared. And for the first time, his boisterous nature felt like a warm blanket instead of a gale-force wind. He returned with a plate, not just with green beans, but with a small, considered portion of everything: turkey, potatoes, stuffing, and a dollop of cranberry sauce. He placed it before her as if it were a royal offering. For a few moments, people ate in a quieter, more reflective atmosphere. Then, my cousin David leaned forward slightly, making sure to catch Maya's eye. "So, your mom said you won an art prize, Maya," he said, his tone gentle and curious. "What did you draw?" Maya looked at him, surprised to be addressed directly. She swallowed a small bite of potato. I drew a picture of the old oak tree in our backyard," she said quietly. "The one with the broken branch that looks like an arm?" David asked. Maya's eyes lit up. It was a small spark, but it was there. "You've seen it?" "Yeah, I've always thought that," he replied with a smile. "What colors did you use for the leaves?" And just like that, a conversation began. It was a fragile, delicate thing, but it was real. My daughter, who had been invisible just 15 minutes earlier, was now talking about her art with her cousin, her voice slowly gaining a quiet confidence. I sat back, watching the scene unfold, a wave of profound relief washing over me. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a magical fix. But the silence had been broken. A new space had been made at the table, and for the first time, my daughter was beginning to fill it. The dinner conversation ebbed and flowed, but something fundamental had shifted. It was no longer a series of competing monologues, but a more deliberate, more inclusive dialogue. The family, chastened and newly aware, made a conscious effort to keep Maya tethered to the conversation. It was clumsy at times. My Uncle Bill, a man who primarily spoke about car engines and property taxes, cleared his throat and asked, "So, you enjoy school, Maya?" It was a generic question, the kind she usually deflected with a nod. But before she could retreat, my sister Clara gently interjected. "Bill, Sarah told me Maya's favorite class is science. She's been learning about the butterfly life cycle." Uncle Bill blinked, processing this new information. "Butterflies, huh? That's something. You know, we get a lot of monarchs in our garden in the late summer. They love the milkweed we planted." Maya's head tilted. "You have milkweed?" she asked, her voice still soft, but now laced with genuine interest. "They need it for their caterpillars." "That's what my wife says," Bill nodded, looking surprised and pleased. "Maybe next summer you can come over and see them." "I'd like that," Maya said, and a real, unforced smile touched her lips. It felt like watching a flower open petal by petal. I sat back, my own food almost forgotten. My role had changed. I was no longer the frantic translator, the desperate advocate trying to force a connection. I was simply a witness. I had to consciously stop myself from jumping in to elaborate on her answers or to praise her for speaking up. This was her space to claim, and I had to trust that she could, and that they would let her. After the plates were cleared and the dessert, a magnificent pumpkin pie, was brought out, the family migrated back to the living room. Usually, this was where Maya would retreat to her book, finding a quiet corner while the adults talked. But this time, as she went to retrieve her book from the armchair, my cousin David stopped her. "Hey, Maya," he said, holding up a board game box. "A few of us are going to play a game. It's called Dixit. It's all about storytelling and pictures. I have a feeling you'd be really good at it." Her eyes widened slightly. She looked at the box, which was covered in whimsical, dreamlike art, and then back at David. She glanced at me, and I gave her a look that I hoped said, "It's your choice." "Okay," she agreed, setting her book aside. She sat on the floor in a circle with David, my younger niece, and even Aunt Carol, who insisted she was terrible at games but wanted to try. I watched from the sofa, nursing a cup of coffee. The game involved describing an abstract card with a single word or phrase and having others guess which card was yours. On her turn, Maya chose a card. She held it in her hands for a moment, studying it. The card depicted a single lit candle in the middle of a vast, dark ocean. The other players waited patiently. A month ago, a year ago, this silence would have been rushed, filled by an adult trying to help her. Now, they gave her the gift of time. Finally, she looked up and said one word: hope. The players all studied their own cards and chose one that they thought matched the theme. When the cards were revealed, it was a beautiful, eclectic mix. A sunrise, a key, a ladder leaning against a cloud. But Maya's candle stood out. Aunt Carol, who had to guess, tapped Maya's card without hesitation. "It has to be this one," Carol said softly. "Even when it's dark, one little light feels so hopeful." Maya beamed. It was more than a smile. It was a radiant glow that transformed her entire face. She hadn't just played a game. She had shared a piece of her inner world, a complex idea, and had been perfectly, completely understood. Later, as the evening began to wind down and people started collecting their coats, I found Maya standing by the large picture window, looking out at the dark garden. This time she wasn't alone. My father, her grandfather, a quiet man himself, a retired professor who was often lost in his own thoughts, was standing beside her. I stopped, not wanting to intrude. "Grandpa," I heard Maya say, "the moon is so bright tonight it's making the frost on the branches look like it's made of sugar." My father was silent for a moment. Then he said, "It does, doesn't it?" An artist's observation. He didn't turn to her but stood shoulder to shoulder, sharing her view. "You know, when your mom was your age, she used to say the wind in the trees sounded like the house was whispering secrets." "It still does," Maya replied, and my father chuckled, a low, warm sound. Tears pricked my eyes. It was a simple exchange, but it was everything. It was a conversation not about her, but with her. It was a connection forged not by my efforts, but by her own unique way of seeing the world. My father hadn't just seen her, he had joined her in her world, even just for a moment, showing her that her perspective was not just valid, but shared. He was finally getting to know his granddaughter. As I watched them, a profound sense of peace settled over me. I had spoken the truth in anger, but it had been received with love. The chasm that had separated my daughter from her family was not yet gone, but tonight, they had built a bridge. The goodbyes were as different from the hellos as night is from day. They were not rushed, nor were they funneled through me. As we stood in the hallway putting on our coats, Aunt Carol knelt down to Maya's level, her movements a little stiff, but her intention clear. "It was so lovely playing that game with you, Maya," she said, her voice gentle. "You have a real talent for it. I hope you'll teach me another one at Christmas." "Okay," Maya replied, zipping up her coat. "I have a few at home." My cousin David gave her a high five. "Don't be a stranger, art prodigy." Even my father, as he hugged me goodbye, reached out and gently squeezed Maya's shoulder. "Keep observing, Maya. The world needs more people who truly see it." Each word, each small gesture, was a stitch helping to mend the fabric of our family. It was a conscious, deliberate act of inclusion, a promise whispered from one person to the next. They saw her now. They were trying. The drive home was quiet, the car filled with a soft, peaceful hum. The streetlights cast fleeting golden patterns across the dashboard. Maya was buckled in the passenger seat beside me, a rare treat she was granted on late nights. She wasn't reading her book, which was resting on her lap. Instead, she was looking out the window, her breath fogging the cold glass. For a long time, neither of us spoke. It wasn't an empty silence, but a comfortable one, filled with the shared weight of the evening. "Mommy," she finally said, her voice soft in the enclosed space of the car. "Yes, sweet pea." She turned to look at me, her face illuminated by the passing lights. "Thank you." "For what, honey?" I asked, though I knew. "For making them see me," she said, her words simple and direct. Yet they carried the entire emotional weight of the night. Before, I felt like a ghost. I was there, but nobody could see me. I thought, maybe there was something wrong with me. Like maybe I was too quiet. I reached over and squeezed her hand, my heart aching with the echo of her past pain. "Oh, Maya, there is nothing wrong with you. Not a single thing. You are perfect just the way you are. The problem was never you. The problem was that I was letting them be blind. I was too quiet, too." It was a profound realization for me. For years, I had seen myself as her protector, her gentle advocate. But in my desire to keep the peace and not make waves, I had become a silent accomplice to her invisibility. I had absorbed the hurt on her behalf, carrying it for her, but I hadn't solved the problem. My anger tonight wasn't just for her. It was for myself, for the years I had spent whispering when I should have been speaking up. "When you tapped the glass," Maya continued, her eyes shining, "I was scared at first. It was so loud. But then, when you spoke, it was like you opened a door for me. And then Aunt Clara came and took my hand. And everyone was looking at me. But it wasn't a bad looking. It was a, we see you looking." "That's because they love you, Maya," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "They just forgot how to show it. Sometimes people, even people who love each other very much, need a reminder to open their eyes." When we got home, I tucked her into bed, the covers pulled up to her chin. Her book was on the nightstand, but she seemed in no hurry to open it. I think I'll like the next family dinner," she said drowsily, her eyelids growing heavy. "I think so too," I whispered, kissing her forehead. As I turned off her light and stood in the doorway, I looked at my daughter, this incredible, thoughtful soul who saw hope in a single candle flame. I hadn't just demanded that my family see her tonight. I had shown her that her voice, and mine, had the power to change the world, even if it was just our small world, in a single dining room. I had shown her she was worth fighting for, and in doing so, I had finally learned how to fight for her properly. The road ahead wouldn't be a straight line. Habits are hard to break. But we had a new foundation to build upon, one of recognition, respect, and the quiet, unshakable strength of a mother's love. She was not invisible, and I would never let her feel that way again.